"Surrender your firearms now or we'll bring in the actual police." That's what they barked at me in my own garage, puffing up like they'd just walked off a cheap TV drama. I've seen combat. I've buried brothers overseas. And now I meant to shake because a handful of neighborhood thugs in knockoff uniforms demand it. I couldn't help but laugh. Halloween must have arrived early. These kids thought paper badges and toy radios made them officers. The gall. Parading around as if they held any power over me, as if I'd simply lead down and let them seize what my family spent generations protecting. Tell me below, would you have gone along or called their bluff? The second those clowns set foot on my property, something didn't sit right. At first their uniforms seemed legit, but decades of military training tuned me totally giveaways. The fabric was too flimsy, the patches caught the sun wrong, and their walk was civilian swagger trying to mimic a service step. My garage door was open. Morning light spilled across my workbench where everything sat with military-level order. "Sir, we're here about neighborhood safety regulations," the tallest announced, flaunting his insignia like he was auditioning for a police drama. "I'm Troy Bennett with HOA Security Enforcement." He put on that forced authority you hear from mall cops trying to sound important. The other two flanked him like extras, clipboards at the ready, radios crackling with faux police chatter that rang off to my trained ears as wrong. I folded my arms and checked out their setup more closely. Tools hung in ordered rows on my garage walls. My gun safe sat against the far wall, federal compliance seals obvious. They were eyeing it like predators circling wounded prey. The whole tableau reanimateur hour attempting to pass as law enforcement. Their stance, their kit, the whole presentation screamed counterfeit authority to anyone with real-world military experience. Ha! Security enforcement. I kept my tone even. Never heard of that agency. The middle one, shorter, jittery energy in every motion, started reading from paper that looked official. Something about firearms investigation authority under subdivision regs. The third, built like a linebacker but moving like a civilian, spoke into his handset using codes that almost sounded right, but not quite. Then recognition flickered like heat off pavement. That tall one, where had I seen him before? I blinked, worrying my memory was playing tricks. Somewhere recent and utterly civilian. Bennett's bargain beds. That tacky jingle-about dreams coming true for the whole family. This phony officer had been selling mattresses on TV last month, doing that goofy dance with an oversized pillow. "Hold up," I said, stepping closer to study his face. "Weren't you the guy in that furniture commercial? Bennett's bargain beds where dreams come true?" I watched his expression change as recognition hit. Color drained faster than rain down a storm drain. His confident posture collapsed like cards in a gust. His partners exchanged frantic looks like deer in headlights. One moment he was officer authority, chest out. The next he was Troy Bennett, mattress salesman busted for playing dress-up in a garage costume show. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Troy stammered, but the practiced authority he'd worn melted. The nervous one kept shuffling his forged papers, trying to keep their charade alive. The linebacker kept talking into his handset. But now it sounded terrified rather than official. "Boys, that uniform material is thinner than a beer can," I commented. Examining their gear and letting my amusement show, "Did you snag those insignias from a cereal box?" The metal felt hollow, cheap, crinkling like foil. Real badges carry weight, presence, authority. These were stage props pretending to be their old deal. Even the stitching looked like Halloween store quality. Troy's anxiety bloomed through sweat-darkening cheap fabric. "Sir, you must cooperate with our investigation immediately," he insisted, pointing toward my gun safe as if he had any right to. "Neighborhood protection requires correct firearms documentation and compliance," he declared. His partners moved in, trying to intimidate by posture, but resembled mall guards more than lawmen. That's when I flipped on my phone camera and began recording everything. 3-2-1, military protocol engaged. My army training took over. In Afghanistan, fake uniforms could get you killed in an instant. These amateurs were using the same intimidation tactics, only with different costumes and civilian targets instead of hostile operatives trying to infiltrate our operations. "Step off my property," I ordered, planting myself between them and my things with military precision. Years of command presence steadied me, though my hand trembled once. "You have no legitimacy here or anywhere else." My U.S. Army command shirt wasn't just apparel. It contrasted real service with their theatrical stunt. The gap between genuine jurisdiction and costume fraud became obvious to onlookers. The nervous clipboard guy was drenched in sweat now, his fake papers trembling. "Sir, these are official HOA enforcement forms," he blurted, voice cracking on each word. The credibility bled from their operation like air from a flat tire. Their confidence evaporated quicker than dew in a Texas sun. Troy tried one last tactic to salvage his collapsing act. "Backup units are en route," he declared. "You're obstructing official duties." His voice broke like a teen trying to sound tough. His counterfeit bravado had splintered. The commercial actor peeked through the Theffany officer mask like bad makeup in the rain. The jingle was probably running through his head at that exact moment. "Call your backup then," I said calmly, still recording everything for evidence and legal protection. "I'm documenting this whole theater for posterity. Let's see how your supervisor feels about a furniture salesman pretending to be a cop." The linebacker had abandoned any pretense of composed calm. The absurdity was staggering. 3 grown men in dress-up trying to intimidate a veteran with fake insignia and toy store chatter. From the driveway, Diane's voice sliced through the tension like a knife through butter. "If you won't cooperate with our security team, I'm calling the real police to report an armed threat to our neighborhood," she announced theatrically. Arms crossed, righteous indignation radiating from her every pore, she matched the theatricality of the sham security crew. "Perfect," I replied, never breaking eye contact with Troy, the mattress salesman. "Make that call. When real officers arrive, we'll see who the real criminals are." Within minutes of Diane's threat, my driveway turned into a warped neighborhood stage. Neighbors merged from all directions, many clutching phones, faces lined with concern. Some held identical safety-first signs with the same crooked spacing and handwriting, professional staging, amateur execution. Diane planted herself at the center of the manufactured crisis, phone to ear. "I need help now. We have an armed veteran endangering residents," she said, "that practice tremor people use to sound horrified, but aren't." I watched in rising amazement as she filed a false report in full view of witnesses. "Ma'am, I haven't threatened anyone," I called out so the crowd could hear. Several neighbors looked uneasy, glancing between Diane and me. "He's brandished weapons at local families," Diane continued into her phone, pointing at my garage. "Our security needs immediate backup." Troy and his masquerade team attempted to appear official again, positioning themselves around my property as if they owned it. Then Diane pulled out her phone and started showing everyone a clip. "Look at this reel," she announced. "Him cleaning his weapons yesterday, threatening our peaceful block." I moved in to see what she was showing. The video showed me maintaining my firearms in my garage, but the framing twisted it so I appeared to be aiming outward. Clever manipulation, but sloppy. Anyone watching closely could see the seams between frames. "That's some creative editing." "Diane," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hollywood would be impressed with that special effects work." Several neighbors squinted at the screen, trying to match the footage to their memories of yesterday. Mrs. Patterson next door stepped closer. "Wait, is that yesterday?" "I was gardening all afternoon. I didn't see anything threatening," she said, confusion on her face. Other neighbors murmured, comparing their recollections to Diane's production. Troy stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. "Ma'am, we need to establish a perimeter for everyone's safety," he said, directing neighbors back with the kind of hand signals you see in action films. The linebacker nodded gravely, playing along with the enforcement theater. "Neighborhood Tragedy Edition," I muttered, taking photos off the obvious staging. "Look at those signs. Same handwriting, same crooked spacing. Did you make these last night, Diane?" She shot me a look cold enough to melt steel, but several neighbors were now noticing the details I pointed out. Young Tommy from down the street stuck his hand up like he was in class. His mother kept him close, but the kid was curious. "Diane Carter, my mom says we moved here because it was safe. Are we not safe anymore?" The child's genuine concern tightened my chest. "These people were frightening kids with a fabricated crisis." "We're perfectly safe," I told Tommy, crouching to his level, though my chest pinched. "Some adults are just playing pretend right now." Diane flushed at my dismissal. Her carefully staged emergency was collapsing under the scrutiny of an 8-year-old's simple questions. The nervous imposter continued to shuffle his papers, but now he looked like he wanted to vanish. "Sir, these are official forms," he blurted, waving sheets that likely came off a printer minutes ago. Sweat stains under his arms showed through the thin fabric. "Official paperwork from what authority?" I asked, stepping closer. "What department issued these? Which supervisor signed off?" his mouth opened and shut like a fish. No answers, just prop pages that wouldn't survive 5 minutes of real scrutiny. Troy attempted to steer attention back to his bogus command. "We're establishing a crime scene perimeter," he proclaimed, gesturing grandly toward my property. "Citizens must maintain a safe distance for their protection." But his voice no longer convinced. The commercial actor was revealing himself through the phony officer act. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor of decades, spoke up. "Young man, what crime exactly?" "Grant's been nothing but helpful since he moved in." Several neighbors nodded. Diane's manufactured consensus was cracking under questioning from people who actually knew me. "He's creating an unsafe environment with military weapons," Diane declared, voice rising theatrically. "This neighborhood demands total protection from gun violence," she insisted. Her extreme stance showed no compromise, no nuance, just eradication of constitutional rights. I couldn't help but shake my head at the absurdity. Diane legally owning a firearm isn't what creates danger. Filing false police reports absolutely does. The crowd buzzed at that point. Some people were now snapping photos, recording the scene for themselves. The fake linebacker was holding his dead handset to his ear again. "Bass, we need backup now." Static nothing. I tuned my emergency scanner to different channels, letting everyone har the emptiness. "Real officers answer their radios, folks. These people are talking to no one." A neighbor I didn't know well stepped forward. "Ma'am, I called the HO office this morning about another matter. They said there's no security enforcement division." The murmurs in the crowd swelled. Diane's made-up authority was being challenged from all sides. "Now that video editing is really advanced," I told the crowd directly. "See how the timestamps don't line up and that lighting change between cuts? Professional sleight of hand, amateurly done." Several neighbors leaned closer to their phones, starting to spot the deception. As police sirens grew closer, Diane beamed with triumph. "Now we'll see who's the real criminal." Her confidence was unshakable, rooted in the belief that her false reports would justify her staged performance. "Perfect timing," I said calmly, still recording everything. "Now we get some actual legitimacy out here instead of actors from a furniture commercial." Troy flinched at the reminder of his true occupation. The approaching sirens meant reality was about to hit the theater, and I was prepared for the impact. The patrol car pulled into my driveway with that certain gravitas only real law enforcement carries. Officer Morrison got out, and I immediately noticed something familiar in his stance, how he scanned the scene, his measured movements, the assessment posture. This man had military training. Troy and his posse approached the officer like they were colleagues in law enforcement. "Officer, we've secured the scene," Troy declared with renewed false bravado. "The suspect has been uncooperative with our investigation." The gall was staggering. These amateurs thought they could deceive a real cop. Officer Morrison's gaze swept the crowd, then landed on the phony emblems and uniforms. Something was off, and his trained instincts picked up on it immediately. "Hold on," he said, raising a hand to halt Troy's advance. "Let me see some ID." Morrison's eyes tightened at my Army command shirt. For a tense beat, his hand hovered near his holster. Suspicion, sharp. Then recognition softened his tone. "Sergeant Major?" That single question carried decades of shared understanding among veterans. "That's right, officer," I answered, though my throat felt dry before credibility finally arrived via genuine military connection. "And these gentlemen aren't who they claim to be." I pointed toward Troy's crew, whose fake credentials were about to be dismantled under professional inspection. Troy tried to keep up the act, increasingly frantic. Officer Morrison were conducting official HOA security enforcement. He held out his forged badge with the last of his bravado. Neighborhood protection requires proper firearm investigation. The nervousness betrayed his performance now. Officer Morrison lowered his phone slowly, his expression sharpening with composed gravity. "Ma'am, fabricated video presented as law is a serious matter." His voice cut through the tension like steel. "This isn't about protecting families. It's about manufacturing fear." He turned deliberately to the crowd, his voice rising. "Who here actually saw threatening behavior yesterday?" Hands remained down, silence condemning Diane more than any insignia could. "I've been trying to tell everyone," I said calmly. "That tall one was in a furniture commercial last month. Bennett's Bargain Beds." Troy's face drained again as his civilian identity was exposed to legitimate scrutiny. The commercial jingle was probably replaying in his head. The linebacker imposter tried to sustain the pretense with mounting desperation. "Officer, we have special investigative clearance through a county contract." But when Morrison asked for paperwork, supervisor contacts, or departmental verification, they produced only stammering excuses and sweaty palms. "Officer Morrison," I went on, "I recognized the impersonation right away. Wrong emblem design, consumer-grade equipment, incorrect comms protocols. These aren't police, they're actors in disguise. My military background had trained me to spot false authority, and now real jurisdiction was confirming my judgment." Morrison pressed his shoulder mic, requesting immediate escalation. Sharp replies crackled back from dispatch, confirming federal contact en route. "This is how real command operates," he explained, turning the moment into a teaching point. Authentication, chain of command, accountability. Not stage chatter, not theatrical posing. His words felt final. The neighbors absorbed each syllable like law carved in stone. Diane stepped forward again, clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline. "Officer, this man is threatening our residents' safety. Our security team documented his dangerous conduct." She brandished the same doctored clip she'd shown the neighbors earlier, confident it would prop up her false narrative. Morrison gave Ita a cursory look, his seasoned instincts slicing through the ruse. "Ma'am, this is clearly routine firearm maintenance. Nothing here is remotely threatening," his tone cutting Diane's claim like a knife through cloth. "He's creating an unsafe environment," Diane insisted, her extremist stance sharpening with every comment. "This neighborhood demands absolute protection from all gun violence." Her uncompromising view left no room for nuance. Officer Morrison turned back to Troy's team with greater command. "Let me make this simple. Show me your department contact info, supervisor names, and legal authorization for this presence." The silence was overwhelming. They had stage props, not authentic credentials. "Funny how they can't answer basic validation questions," I noted, keeping my recording going. "Real law enforcement doesn't object to supervisor calls. They encourage checks." The imposters found themselves wedged between exposed fakery and looming legal consequences. Troy made one last, desperate plea to salvage his operation. "Officer, we have special clearance through a private security contract, but Morrison's professional experience saw through every excuse. Private security has clear limits, and impersonating police officers enters federal crime territory. Private security cannot impersonate law enforcement," Morrison told the crowd. "These insignias, uniforms, and radio gear are meant to mislead civilians into thinking they're police. That's a federal offense." The crowd watched with growing comprehension. Their neighbor's staged emergency was being dismantled by professional command. The act was obvious now, the manipulation revealed, the false claims collapsing under scrutiny. Morrison's comms blended with real police traffic. "Dispatch, I need a detective and federal contact for possible civil rights violations." The pretenders exchanged alarmed looks. Their act was about to become a criminal probe with grave consequences. "That's Detective Walsh's area," Morrison told me privately. "Civil rights violations involving counterfeit law enforcement." His expertise expanded the situation beyond local theater into federal crime territory. Troy was sweating now, his furniture salesman persona fully exposed. His crew backed away from the property, realizing their impersonation had legal ramifications they hadn't anticipated. Playing cop had seemed clever until actual cops arrived. "Officer Morrison," I said, feeling vindicated professionally. "I appreciate genuine command distinguishing between real and fake insignia." The veteran connection had granted instant credibility and professional respect that couldn't be faked. Morrison nodded, understanding and more concerned. "Sergeant Major, your assessment was spot on. These men committed serious crimes today." The bogus authority was smashed. The real investigation was beginning, and justice was taking shape. As Morrison placed Troy's crew under inquiry, he asked Diane the crucial question that would decide her fate. "Ma'am, did you hire these men, knowing they would impersonate police officers?" Detective Walsh arrived with a mobile command unit that signaled serious federal involvement. This wasn't a neighborhood spat or a simple property argument anymore. Federal agencies were engaged, evidence tables were being arranged with expert efficiency, and my straightforward property dispute was quickly escalating into a criminal investigation with national reach. "Mr. Hayes," Detective Walsh introduced herself with professional precision and federal authority. "We need to understand exactly what occurred here today and in the weeks leading up to this confrontation." Her stuff included digital forensics gear, financial tracing tools, and interagency coordination that suggested the case was much larger than anyone first thought. Within hours of intense review, the findings revealed shocking details about the plot against me that went well beyond simple neighborhood harassment. Diane's computer showed months of late-night searches, endless tabs about removing firearms from residential areas, and research into police-style security companies. The planning wasn't spontaneous fear, reasonable safety concern. Mr. Hayes, Cher searched you extensively before you even moved here, Detective Walsh explained, presenting the computer records with professional concern. Google searches included how to remove old soldiers from neighborhoods and removing military veterans from communities, she continued, exposing the methodical nature of the targeting. The deliberate focus was systematic, precise, and deeply alarming. Forensic analysis revealed the chilling depth of Diane's obsessive planning and ideological extremism. Search histories showed searches for absolute safety zones free from all gun violence, creating firearm-free residential communities and eliminating military weapons from suburban areas entirely. This wasn't reasonable safety concern or normal community caution. This was ideological extremism with dangerous implications. The financial logs were equally incriminating and revealed the monetary motive behind the rights violations. Bank records showed Troy had paid Diane $3,000 up front, with additional monthly payments planned for successful firearm elimination project completion. This wasn't neighborhood protection or valid concerns. It was a paid scheme to undermine liberties for profit. Text messages revealed targeted methods and a calculated approach to rights abuse. Diane had specifically requested police-style enforcement to intimidate the veteran into compliance and was promised continuing monthly payments for successful contract execution and ongoing cooperation. The violations were intentional, financially driven, and carefully plotted. Troy's business model became clear through intensive federal review and multi-state coordination. His company targeted gun owners in affluent neighborhoods using manufactured crises and police impersonation. To create security contracts and steady revenue, my case was only one operation within a larger criminal enterprise spanning multiple states. The timeline was striking in its precision and premeditation. Detective Walsh continued, spreading files across the investigation table with meticulous professionalism. Diane contacted Troy's company the day after you signed your house contract. She had planned this confrontation for months before you moved in, she explained, exposing the personal nature of the targeting. Phone records showed extensive coordination between Diane and Troy's network over months of planning. Calls, strategy sessions, and manipulation tactics were all thoroughly documented in digital records. They had rehearsed this confrontation like a military operation with my liberties as the main objective and my military service as the vulnerability to exploit. Analysis showed Diane's deep research into my military background, service record, and personal history for targeting purposes. She had studied my Afghanistan deployment, military police training, and family firearms collection with obsessive focus. The targeting was deliberate, precise, and tailored for maximum psychological effect and constitutional violation. I thought this was just neighborhood politics and a simple community disagreement, I told Detective Walsh, absorbing the overwhelming records of targeting and criminal planning. Turns out I hadn't even unpacked my safe before she wanted to destroy my rights for money, I added, my voice catching as the betrayal finally registered. The betrayal felt intensely personal now. Residents gave statements that exposed Diane's manipulation campaign and months of preparation. She'd spent weeks stoking anti-gun sentiment, spreading fear about dangerous military weapons, disrupting their peaceful community, and warning about threats to children. The performance had been months in the making with a professional criminal organization and deliberate manipulation. Federal databases showed Troy's company had targeted 47 veterans across 6 states using the same tactics and criminal methods. Research military backgrounds, bribe corrupt HOA officials, manufacture crises, then profit from security contracts and intimidation. The scope was national, the targeting intentional, and the techniques honed by extensive criminal experience. Banking records showed Troy's syndicate had made over $2 million through these impersonation operations and rights abuses. Multiple HOA officials in different states had accepted bribes to enable sham enforcement harassment of military veterans for ideological and financial reasons. The enterprise was sophisticated, lucrative, and carefully orchestrated. Detective Walsh, I said, studying the expanding files and grasping the scope. This stopped being about my property when I realized they're targeting veterans nationwide for profit. The reach was national. The targeting deliberate and the rights abuses extensive and profitable. This was organized crime with constitutional implications. Federal coordination was quickly broadening the probe beyond local fraud into organized civil rights violations with national consequences. Multiple states were reporting comparable operations, each involving corrupt HO officials, taking payments to permit phony enforcement campaigns that harassed military veterans for ideological and monetary reasons. The network was large and well run. The legal exposure was grave for all participants and worsened with every new disclosure. Federal counts for conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law carried up to 10 years behind bars, with Diane's official title making the allegations more severe rather than shielding her from prosecution. The consequences were unmistakable. Documents showed the plot intentionally aimed at veterans who owned valuable gun collections and had deep emotional ties to their firearms to maximize impact. They dug into service records, family backgrounds, and personal weaknesses to inflict the greatest psychological harm during staged authority confrontations. The psychological warfare elements were advanced and intentionally cruel. In Afghanistan, we had a saying about those who betray the people they swore to protect, I told Detective Walsh as I reviewed the records of targeted victims and the criminal schemers. Diane took an oath to serve this town, then sold veterans' rights for monthly payments. I added, feeling the betrayal's weight. Detective Walsh's radio hissed with updates from other jurisdictions and growing federal collaboration. Mr. Hayes, we're finding similar operations in 5 other counties and several states, she said. Disclosing the national reach, my personal case was turning into the linchpin for taking down a nationwide criminal enterprise. The evidence was staggering in both scale and specificity. The conspiracy was proved beyond doubt, and the federal stakes were obvious and grave. What began as 3 imposters in my garage had revealed a national syndicate deliberately targeting military veterans, liberties for profit, and extremist beliefs. This matter was now part of a broader civil rights investigation crossing multiple states and aimed at military families. The community center had never seen anything like the overflowing emergency meeting that followed. Troy, facing serious federal exposure, chose to launch a desperate credibility attack against me. If he couldn't keep his funny authority, he'd attempt to ruin my reputation instead. Ladies and gentlemen, Troy declared to the crowd, suddenly eloquent without his makeshift cop act, I've obtained damning video evidence. He brandished his phone like an attorney with exhibits. This clip shows Grant Hayes pointing firearms menacingly inside his garage. The room fell quiet. Neighbors who had backed me looked uneasy. Mrs. Patterson knit her brows at the screen. Even Tommy's mother drew her boy in closer, as if proximity to me had become dangerous. Troy's doctored footage was functioning exactly as planned. These clips demonstrate military veterans are an inherent threat to residential areas, Troy continued, his voice buoyed by the crowd's reaction. Combat exposure produces unpredictable psychological conditions that endanger civilians. The PTSD stigma became his weapon, far more potent than any fake badge. I felt my chest clench, not with fear, but from personal violation. My service record was being twisted into ammunition against me. Years of protecting civilians in Afghanistan, countless instances of restraint under fire, all being reframed as signs of danger to the very people I had sworn to defend. Interesting paperwork, I said, rising slowly. Mind if I verify those documents? My tone was the controlled cadence I'd used when handling hostile situations overseas. Because the military has verification hotlines for service history. Troy's certainty faltered somewhat, but he pushed on with mounting desperation. Mr. Hayes has been observed yelling threats at neighbors after dark, he intoned, pointing theatrically toward the back of the room. One resident confirms dangerous late-night conduct. The personal assault cut deeper than anything he'd tried before. He leveraged neighborhood gossip against me, weaponizing the anxieties that spread when rumors circulate unchecked. The cruelty's precision was breathtaking. "Stop right there," a voice called from the rear. Military counselor Dr. Rebecca Stone had arrived, carrying advanced forensic authentication tools. "Mr. Bennett, that video is digitally altered and unreliable." Her professional authority sliced through Troy's performance like a knife through silk. The room erupted in stunned whispers. Troy's face drained as his staged display collapsed under expert scrutiny. "These are official military dossiers," he stammered, but Dr. Stone was already showing authentication readouts that proved the materials were forged. Grant's authentic service record shows commendations for protecting civilians and exceptional restraint under fire, Dr. Stone told the community. He received medals for preventing civilian casualties and de-escalating dangerous situations. The truth was dismantling Troy's smear effort, but the emotional harm had been inflicted. The stigma Troy had weaponized struck deeper than legal accusations or costumes. He had attacked the part of my identity I was most vulnerable about, the invisible wounds combat leaves. "You want to know about PTSD?" I asked the room, my voice quivering slightly. "Yes, combat changed me. Yes, I have struggles, but my training taught me discipline, responsibility, and the gravity of using force." The confession felt like standing exposed before strangers. The vulnerability was terrifying but necessary. These neighbors needed to grasp the difference between Hollywood myths and military reality. Combat veterans were not ticking time bombs. We are trained professionals who grasp violence more clearly than anyone. "This isn't just metal and wood," I continued, thinking of my grandfather's hunting rifle locked in the safe back home. "This is 3 generations of Americans who've served. My grandfather defended this land during the Depression, my father in Vietnam, and I in Afghanistan." Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who had lived here for decades, rose slowly. "Young man," she said, addressing Troy directly, "my son died in Afghanistan protecting people like you. How dare use his sacrifice to attack another veteran?" Her words bore the weight of ultimate loss and moral authority. The room shifted as others began to speak up. Veterans in the crowd shared their stories. The credibility attack backfired as real accounts replaced the fabrications. "I've never used violence as a civilian," I told the room, "because the military taught me the weight of that responsibility. People who haven't served don't understand. We're trained to protect, not to destroy." The emotional truth resonated with neighbors in ways legal arguments couldn't. Dr. Stone continued exposing Troy's forged papers with professional rigor. Every page of these fake records contained mistakes proving they were manufactured. Genuine military inquiries follow strict protocols, use precise language, and require multiple authentication signatures. Troy's medical assertions were especially offensive. Claiming PTSD makes veterans dangerous, though civilians ignore decades of evidence showing the opposite. Veterans are more likely to help neighbors, volunteer in their communities, and protect others than to cause harm. "Mr. Bennett," Dr. Stone addressed Troy directly, "your bogus psychological evaluations use terminology that hasn't been in military medicine for 15 years. These assessments are fraudulent." Troy realized his credibility attack had completely failed. Facing exposure, Office forged materials and mounting hostility from the community, Hettried to leave the meeting. But Officer Morrison waited at the exit, prepared to detain him for questioning about falsified documents. "Mr. Troy Bennett," Morrison said evenly, "you're not leaving until we talk about those fake federal forms." The smear campaign had added new criminal charges. Troy's panic had only deepened his legal peril. Emotional healing began as neighbors approached me after the meeting with apologies for accepting tampered footage, thanks for my service, and support for my constitutional rights. The attempted reputation assault had ultimately strengthened community ties. As federal agents entered the community center, the case's scale widened beyond anything anyone had expected. What began as neighborhood theater was becoming a federal case study in organized civil rights violations. This matter was now part of a broader civil rights probe reaching across multiple states. The FBI mobile command center that rolled into our community center parking lot looked like something out of a crime novel. Black panels shone in the sunlight, antennas jutted skyward like metal thorns, and agents unpacked proof tables laden with maps and laptops. This was no longer a dispute, it was a battleground of law against organized deception. "Mr. Hayes," Special Agent Rodriguez introduced himself with crisp authority, "your case has uncovered a multi-state syndicate spanning 6 regions." He spread out files, timelines, connected with red threads, financial ledgers, and victim lists that made my stomach tighten. My confrontation was only one node in an expansive web. The federal database search exposed Troy's double life. He wasn't merely a salesman playing at being a cop. He was wanted in 3 states for impersonating officers and harassing veterans. As Rodriguez named Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, Troy's knuckles blanched on the chair arm, sweat staining the folder before him. 47 veterans across 6 states, Rodriguez said, pointing to highlighted names. All targeted in the same manner. Same badges, same scripts, HOA officials accepting bribes. The cruelty was industrial, not ad hoc. It was a franchise of intimidation operated with chilling efficiency. Federal files showed Troy's criminal record was extensive. Warrants in Arizona for posing as federal agents, charges in Colorado for fraudulent security contracts, and investigations in New Mexico for orchestrated harassment of military families. The man was a professional predator specializing in abusing veterans. My mind struggled to take it all in. I thought this was just Diane being extreme about neighborhood safety, I told the agent. It turns out it's the HOA version of organized crime, and the attack on my liberties was actually part of a national scheme. Financial records revealed millions moving through Troy's operation. The model was coldly consistent. Study service histories, identify veterans with heirloom firearms, then stage emergencies to terrify them into submission. Diane leaned forward, trying to seem composed, but her hand trembled when the phrase, complicit civil rights crimes, echoed through the room. The syndicate's precision was undeniable. Computer files charted service histories, family pictures, even property layouts. They didn't merely harass, they profiled. Agent Rodriguez pointed at my file. Your command background, your collection, your deployments. This made you a primary target. It wasn't paranoia, it was method. Then, an unexpected twist. On a live call, veteran Michael Torres from Arizona stared into the camera and pointed immediately. That's him. Same phony badge, same radio chatter. He tried it on me 2 years ago. The room froze. A stranger hundreds of miles away confirmed the fraud in real time. Rodriguez leaned in, his tone sharpening. Mr. Bennett, your cover is blown. That furniture ad wasn't just embarrassing. It exposed you to every jurisdiction you've been running from. Troy's composure crumbled, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. Diane's turn came next. Mrs. Carter, Rodriguez said, hiring fugitives to impersonate police makes you an accomplice in rights violations. Her lips pressed together. Her denial sounded fragile. The HOA title she clung to now resembled an anchor dragging her under. The case's ripple effects extended beyond my neighborhood. National media attention shone a light on HOA overreach everywhere. Reports began surfacing from other towns about private authority abuse, liberty violations, and the need for stronger safeguards for individual freedoms. If there were an award for funny cops, Troy would win, I muttered, photographing the confiscated badges. But this isn't theater. This is about veterans' protections being sold out for contracts, the crowd murmured in somber agreement. Federal court actions moved swiftly. The paperwork was overwhelming, the violations clear, and the plot undeniable. Troy's syndicate was being dismantled with further arrests occurring across multiple states. Rodriguez showed me surveillance from other regions, same uniforms, same badges, same intimidation methods. Your case provided the crucial link to tie all these operations together. My neighborhood conflict was unlocking justice for veterans nationwide. Congressional hearings were being arranged to address HOA limits and protecting liberty. My case was being cited as evidence for the need for stronger federal oversight of private authority, overreach, and measures to prevent veteran harassment. This ceased to be just about my guns when I realized they were attacking veterans across the country. I told the prosecutor now. It's about defending the Constitution for everyone. Who served it overseas, legal precedent was being set through rulings that would permanently shield freedoms from private authority abuse. My local fight was evolving into a textbook case in civil rights law and veteran protection. The reach of justice was expanding from individual accountability to systemic reform. Federal legislation was being drafted to prevent similar schemes, create monitoring systems, and establish rapid response protocols for violations. As federal agents readied more arrests, Rodriguez fixed his gaze on me. Mr. Hayes, Diane's attorney just reached out. She agreed to cooperate in exchange for a lighter sentence. The federal courthouse conference room carried the weight of American justice. 3 months after the standoff in my garage, I found myself seated across from prosecutors, defense attorneys, and Agent Rodriguez, discussing the destiny of those who had tried to strip away my freedoms. Mr. Hayes, Prosecutor Sarah Walker began, Diane Carter's lawyer has offered her full cooperation against Troy's syndicate in return for a reduced sentence. Because you are the primary victim, we want your input. The burden of influencing someone else's punishment felt heavier than any rifle I'd carried in. Afghanistan Troy's fate had already been sealed with striking clarity. The Crack of the judge's gavel echoing like a gunshot. Judge Harrison sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison for orchestrated civil rights violations, along with charges as a fugitive. Every company asset was seized for victim restitution, and he was permanently banned from any involvement in the security industry. The gavel's echo lingered like the closing note of a battle hymn. The scale of Troy's operation was enormous, Walker continued, laying out case files. His scheme brought in over $2 million by targeting veterans. Your testimony was the key piece that unraveled it all. The systematic abuse demanded maximum accountability. Justice without room for redemption isn't true justice, I replied, though doubt burned in my chest. Part of me wanted Diane locked away forever. Another part remembered the oath I swore overseas, to defend fairness, even for those who wronged me. Still, violating rights requires real consequences. My training had taught proportional response. But here I was forced to weigh punishment. Against systemic reform, her cooperation had already enabled agents to arrest 5 more HOA officials across 3 states and dismantle 2 other companies running similar harassment schemes, yet. Her expression carried the agony of betrayal. She whispered, barely audible, "I thought I was protecting families." That single line struck harder than any legal term. Her testimony was sparing an estimated 100 veterans from the ordeal I endured. The plea deal was strict. Diane would serve 8 to 10 years in prison, repay all damages, including my legal costs, face a lifetime ban from HOA leadership, and commit to civic education programs during supervised release. As she lowered her head, the overhead lights glinted against the courthouse seal behind her, a silent reminder that the Constitution towers over us all. "Mrs. Carter," I said during the victim impact statement, "you tried to strip away my freedoms before I even unpacked my belongings. But your cooperation is preventing other veterans from facing the same assault, Justice." Demanded acknowledgement of both the crime and the effort to make amends. Community members also testified about the loss of trust and civil rights violations. Mrs. Henderson spoke of her son's sacrifice in the military, explaining how Diane's betrayal dishonored every veteran's service. The HOA voted to permanently remove her and enforce compliance oversight. Meanwhile, Congress was advancing legislation sparked by our case, the Veterans Protection Act. It would enforce HOA accountability, create rapid response systems for veteran harassment, and require annual civic training for all private authority officials. During her formal apology, Diane's voice trembled. I let extremist ideology and financial pressure turn me into someone who attacked the very people who served this country. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. Her sincerity felt real, but sincerity alone couldn't erase her actions. Cooperation may have helped others, but accountability required real time behind bars. 8 years felt just beyond individual punishment. The case drove sweeping reform. Educational programs spread nationwide. A national database now tracked abuses by private authorities, while veteran advocacy groups built rapid response networks. Troy's confiscated assets reimbursed every identified victim across the 6-state reach of his scheme. The $2 million stolen through fraud was returned to veterans targeted in similar ways. The case set a precedent defending liberties nationwide. Judge Harrison stated at sentencing, "Private authority cannot trample individual rights under the guise of false emergencies or corrupt officials. Healing came through structured accountability." The HOA introduced strict bylaws, created a veteran oversight committee, and mandated annual civic education for members. "The Constitution belongs to every American," I told the court in closing, "and it's worth protecting one neighborhood at a time." This precedent would shield future veterans from organized attacks. Already, courts nationwide were citing it to strengthen protections, punish systemic abuses, and establish permanent oversight of private authority. Restitution funds supported community education, veteran services, and compliance monitoring, matching justice to restoration. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Harrison told me, "your ability to recognize counterfeit authority, paired with your dedication to education over vengeance, has built protections for all Americans." The local fight had grown into national defense. New safeguards were in place: automatic investigations into harassment, civil rights division monitoring of private authority, and cross-state tracking of violations. The resolution hit home when I received letters from veterans across the country, people shielded by the precedent our case established. My fight had extended far beyond one neighborhood, As I left the courthouse, Agent Rodriguez handed me another envelope. It bore the seal of the Supreme Court. They want your input on upcoming cases about private authority limits, he said, I realized. Then, the battlefield had only moved higher. 18 months after. 3 imposters tried to seize my firearms. My ranch had become something unimaginable. The Hayes Liberty Learning Center. This month, we welcomed our 200th visitor, veterans. HOA officials, law students, and civic scholars gathering to study how to preserve freedoms while keeping neighborhoods safe. The Supreme Court chambers that once echoed with our case now sent visitors to me, where theory became lived lesson. My garage, the place it all began, now displayed the fake badges those imposters carried. The cheap trinkets stood in contrast to genuine credentials. A powerful reminder of what happens when false authority takes root. I remembered how silent that courtroom had been, my heartbeat thundering. Like war drums beneath stone columns, Diane was now in her 6th year of prison, engaged in civic programs and writing to veterans about preventing abuses. Her letters reflected genuine remorse. I once believed fear made communities safe, she wrote. Now I know only freedom can. Her words carried more weight than her courtroom apology. She admitted her extremist beliefs had blinded her, and now she understood that safeguarding rights for all creates real safety. Her change felt authentic, though consequences remained necessary. I still saw her face under the courthouse seal, voice breaking with guilt. Troy, meanwhile, remained imprisoned with 19 years left. His operation was permanently dismantled, national databases ensuring no revival. Reports of fake authority harassment plummeted nationwide. His sentence continued to echo in federal training rooms. Mr. Hayes, Congresswoman Martinez said during her visit to the center, the Veterans Protection Act has stopped more than 300 similar incidents since becoming law. The legislation born from our case was shielding veterans. Everywhere, the halls of the Supreme Court had become guardians for soldiers returning home. Community healing surpassed all expectations. Neighbors who once sided with Diane now volunteered at educational events. Children once terrified by staged emergencies now learned about civic duty. Tommy, once paralyzed with fear, studied case law like a future advocate. Mrs. Henderson, at 86, served as our volunteer coordinator. Grant defended more than his own weapons, she told visitors. He defended the Constitution my son died to protect. Her words carried the weight of sacrifice and civic honor. Visitors often stood in silence afterward, as though our modest center had become an extension of the Supreme Court. Our programs expanded to include police, federal agencies, and military units. The curriculum focused on defending rights, spotting counterfeit authority, and balancing freedom with community. Order, professors said, my lectures conveyed what books could not, the trembling hands when liberty itself is on trial. I never thought protecting my gun safe would lead to teaching civic law, I told one quarterly assembly. But no veteran who fights for freedom abroad should return home to fight for the same rights again. My voice shook as it had that day in court when the HOA painted playgrounds as war zones to justify stripping liberties. The oversight systems from our case were working. Investigations triggered automatically, response teams mobilized, and permanent monitoring of private authority created safeguards that once felt impossible. The gavel's first strike now shaped policy instead of instilling fear. The veteran network born from this case grew into a nationwide coalition offering legal aid, response coordination, and education. What began as desperate phone calls had become a united defense. Supreme Court justices now cited Hayes versus Carter as precedent in strengthening freedoms across America. Private communities could no longer override rights through fabricated crises or corrupt enforcers. Supreme Court justices now cited Hayes versus Carter as precedent in strengthening freedoms across America. Private communities could no longer override rights through fabricated crises or corrupt enforcers. During lectures, I often reflected, I once thought HOA disputes were just about fences and lawns. Turns out some of them wage full-scale assaults on freedom. Students laughed nervously, then took notes, because the joke was now legal precedent. The rifle my grandfather passed down, the same heirloom at the center of it all, sat proudly on display in the Learning Center. 3 generations of service embodied in steel and wood, honored now through civic education rather than conflict. Sunlight cast its shadow across the bronze plaque. History bowing before law, agents continued studying our case to learn how to stop organized civil rights abuses. Rodriguez often reminded recruits, Even fake jewelry can fool a neighborhood until one veteran refuses to bow. Scholars arrived regularly to research the limits of private authority and the defense of personal rights. My trembling words from the courtroom now appeared in legal textbooks, fueling debate and policy. Healing reached its fullest when Tommy, once frightened by Diane's staged crisis, entered law school to pursue civil rights. Fear had become advocacy. He promised one day he'd argue before the very bench where my own pulse once thundered. Every American deserves to live freely in their own home, I told a new class of HOA officials in required training. And that means knowing the difference between genuine authority and staged intimidation. Their pens raced. Just as the Chief Justice once warned, freedom erodes when fear governs. Division had been replaced with unity. Annual events now gathered families to study the Bill of Rights, civic responsibility, and the balance of liberty with community order. The lawn once divided by yard signs now displayed banners quoting America's founding freedoms. Prosecutors used our case to train lawyers on civil rights abuses by private actors. The precedent required serious consequences for organized schemes and permanent safeguards. Rodriguez said every briefing ended with a slide of my garage door captioned, "Where false authority died, the Hayes Liberty Learning Center became a destination for all who valued democratic freedoms." Thousands visited to learn about veterans' protections and the vigilance required against counterfeit authority. The same garage door once, breached by imposters, now framed school children, reciting the First Amendment, turning private conflict into collective strength. Every evening, I passed the steel gate where false authority collapsed, breathing in the smell of grass and permanence. My hand always touched the plaque by my door. Hayes Liberty Learning Center, dedicated to defending every American's right to live free. That inscription reminded me the true victory wasn't about a gun or a garage. It was about proving freedom stands taller every day. If you're still watching, tell me in the comments what this story made you feel, what you'd change, and whether I've earned a thumbs up. And if you'd like to support the channel, that little thanks button is right below.